7:30 in the morning. The Philippine Sea. The aircraft carrier, USS Gerald R. moved through a glass calm sea at 22 knots. This was not a standard training exercise. A high-priority automated collision warning had just appeared on every primary console on the bridge. The warning came from a Chinese People's Liberation Army Navy vessel that did not exist on any radar screen in the strike group. The morning sun caught the gray steel of the carrier as it cut through the deep blue water. Inside the bridge, the atmosphere shifted from routine watch-standing to immediate crisis. Commander Sarah Vance looked at the primary navigation display. The warning was blinking in a sharp, urgent red. It was formatted in perfect United States Navy tactical protocol. It stated that a Chinese Type 055 destroyer was 40 meters ahead of the carrier bow. The commander spoke into the internal comms. Radar. Bridge. Confirm contact at 000 degrees. The radar officer responded immediately. Bridge. Radar. We have clear skies and empty water for 60 miles. There is nothing in front of us. Vance looked out the thick windows. The horizon was empty. The water was undisturbed. Yet, the automated system began to chime a proximity alert. It was a sound that should only happen when steel is about to meet steel. 12 miles to the west, the Chinese destroyer, Nanchang, sat silent in the water. Its crew was experiencing the exact same phenomenon. On their battle management screens, an American aircraft carrier was listed as being less than 50 meters from their position. Their sensors showed nothing but open ocean. The discrepancy was impossible. Both ships were seeing a digital ghost that spoke their own language perfectly. The signal was not a glitch. It was a precise, encrypted broadcast that had bypassed every firewall in both fleets. It contained specific hull numbers and current speeds. It even included the names of the commanding officers on watch. This was more than a technical error. It was a breach of the most secure military networks on the planet. On the flight deck of the Ford, crews paused. They could feel the carrier begin a hard turn to starboard. The massive ship leaned as its rudder shifted to avoid a collision with an invisible enemy. In the Combat Information Center, the tension was thick enough to feel. If the automated system was right, they were about to strike a 10,000-ton warship. If the radar was right, they were turning for no reason. This was the first moment of a crisis that would span the next hour. The two most powerful navies in the world were now reacting to data they could not verify. The systems designed to prevent war were now creating the conditions for one. Trust in the machines was fading. Fear of the unknown was taking its place. The morning was still quiet. It would not stay that way. 7:35 in the morning. Deep beneath the flight deck of the USS Gerald R. The Tactical Flag Command Center was a dark room, filled with the hum of high-powered cooling fans and the glow of blue light from a dozen different displays. Rear Admiral Marcus Miller stood at the center of the room. He was a man who trusted his instruments. He had spent 30 years relying on the Aegis combat system to tell him the truth about the world beyond the hull. "Admiral, we have a data injection," the combat systems officer stated. His voice was steady, but thin. Miller did not turn his head. "Define injection." "Commander, the collision warning is coming through our own encrypted Link 16 tactical network. It is using a cryptographic key that was supposed to be retired 48 hours ago. It is identifying as the Chinese destroyer Nanchang. The data includes the ship engine speed and its current rudder angle." Miller looked at the primary display and the radar. "What does the radar say?" "The SPY-6 radar is operating at peak performance. It shows absolutely nothing. No hull, no wake, no electronic emissions. If there is a 10,000-ton destroyer 40 meters off our bow, it is the quietest ship in human history." The Admiral felt the floor tilt beneath his boots. The carrier was still in its hard turn. 100,000 tons of nuclear-powered steel was dancing with a ghost. If the radar sees nothing, then the data is a lie. Override the navigation computer. Return to base course. The officer typed rapidly. "Sir, I cannot override. The system has classified this as a Level 1 flight deck emergency." The computer has locked the manual override to prevent us from steering into the contact. 7:40 in the morning. The bridge of the Chinese destroyer, Nanchang. Captain Jiang Wei gripped the edge of the chart table. His ship was also turning. On his screens, the American carrier was a massive red icon. It was so close, it was overlapping with the symbol for his own ship. His fire control technicians were shouting, "Captain, the forward vertical launch system is offline. The automated safety protocols have engaged. The computer believes an impact is imminent. It will not allow a missile launch while the hull is under collision threat." Zhang looked out at the Philippine Sea. The water was like a blue mirror. There was no carrier. There was no smoke. There was no wake. Scan for stealth drones. Scan for acoustic signatures. Anything. Nothing. Captain, the ocean is silent. But the signal is getting stronger. It is now broadcasting in Mandarin and English on all emergency frequencies. The radio on the bridge crackled to life. It was a synthesized voice. It sounded neither American nor Chinese. It was perfectly neutral. It was perfectly cold. Warning. Vessel 78 and Vessel 101. You are in a restricted corridor. Maintain your current evasive maneuvers. Do not attempt to re-engage primary sensors. The path must remain clear. The bridge of the Nanchang went silent. Vessel 78 was the hull number of the Ford. Vessel 101 was the Nanchang. 7:42 in the morning. Both ships were now moving away from each other. They were being steered by a force they could not see and a voice they did not recognize. The Ghost was no longer just a blip. It was now giving orders. The two most powerful ships in the region were no longer under the control of their captains. They were being moved like chess pieces on a board they could not see. The Ghost had a voice, and the Ghost was in charge. 7:45 in the morning. Above the Philippine Sea, the catapult fired with a violent jolt. Lieutenant Commander Elias Thorne felt the familiar crush of G-force as his F-18 Super Hornet cleared the bow of the USS Gerald R. Ford. His call sign was Eagle 161. His mission was simple. He was to provide a visual confirmation of the empty space that the ship computers claimed was occupied by a Chinese warship. Eagle 161. Airborne, Thorne said. The controller on the carrier responded. Copy. Eagle. Vector 005. Climb to 5,000 feet. Report any surface contact. Thorne banked the fighter. He looked down through the canopy. The ocean was a vast and featureless blue. There was no ship. There was no white foam of a wake. But as he leveled his wings, his heads-up display began to flicker. A green box appeared on the glass. It was a targeting cue. The aircraft computer was slaving the nose of the fighter toward a point. In the empty air. Control. Eagle. I have a digital lock on the Ghost, Thorne said. The system says there is a destroyer right below me. I am looking at the spot now. There is nothing but water. Repeat. The ocean is empty. Confirm. Eagle. The controller said. We are seeing the same data. Your aircraft is now slave to the strike group network. The signal is being shared by every ship. In the screen. 7:50 in the morning. 2,000 miles away at Pearl Harbor. Inside the Pacific Command Center. The atmosphere was one of controlled panic. A wall of monitors showed the live data feed from the Philippine Sea. Analysts were frantically typing. They were trying to trace the source of the encrypted Link 16 injection. A technical sergeant looked at his commanding officer. Sir, we have a secondary escalation. The foreign military destroyer has just launched a military helicopter. It is flying. A search pattern exactly 5 miles from our fighter. They are looking for the same thing we are. The admiral leaned over the console. Are they communicating? No, sir. But they are using the same tactical frequency. Our systems are now picking up their internal telemetry. It is as if the two fleets have been merged into a single network. We can see what they see. They can see what we see. This was the nightmare scenario for any cyber warfare specialist. The most sensitive tactical networks of two rival nations were now entangled. Every secret, every frequency, every data point was being leaked back and forth through the mysterious ghost signal. 7:52 in the morning, the cockpit of Eagle 161. Thorne watched his radar screen. It was a mess of ghost icons and false returns. Suddenly, a new warning tone chirped in his ear. It was the sound of a missile guidance radar, but it was not an American tone. It was the high-pitched warble of a foreign military fire control system. "Control, I am being painted," Thorne shouted. "The foreign vessel is locking me up." "Negative. Eagle," the carrier responded. "The foreign vessel is not emitting. Their radar is cold. We are monitoring their electronic signature. They are not targeting you." "Then who is?" Thorne asked. He looked at his display. The warning was not coming from the destroyer. It was coming from the empty air 40 meters ahead of the carrier bow. The ghost was no longer just a collision warning. It was now acting like a combatant. Thorne pulled his fighter into a steep climb. His heart hammered against his ribs. Below him, the carrier and the destroyer were still moving away from each other, but the digital space between them was filling with threats that didn't exist in the physical world. Then, the lights in, his cockpit went black. Every screen died at once. For 3 seconds, he was flying a blind piece of metal at 500 miles per hour. When the power returned, his display showed something new. A single line of text in the center of his visor. "Maintain distance. The transition is beginning." 7:55 in the morning. The Tactical Flag Command Center of the USS Gerald R. Ford. Rear Admiral Miller stared at the primary tactical plot. The icons for his entire strike group were beginning to drift. On the screen, the ships were moving in a perfect, synchronized pattern. It was a defensive shell. But the ships were not responding to his helm commands. The computer was executing a maneuver called a radial brake. It was a tactic used to minimize the profile of a fleet against an incoming wave of missiles. The admiral turned to his chief of staff. "Who authorized a radial brake?" The captain shook his head. "No one, sir. The Aegis system has taken total control of the propulsion and steering. It is citing an imminent threat from a non-kinetic source. It is reacting to the transition mentioned in the message." Miller leaned over the glass table. The transition. What does that mean? Is it a cyber attack? Is it a hardware failure? We do not know, Admiral, but the Nanchang is doing the same thing. Look at the satellite feed. On a secondary screen, the Chinese destroyer and its 2 escorting frigates were also peeling away from their original course. They were moving with a mechanical precision that suggested no human hands were on the throttles. The 2 rival fleets were performing a choreographed retreat. They were being cleared from the area like spectators at a crime scene. 8 o'clock in the morning. The bridge of the Nanchang. Captain Zhang stood perfectly still. His hands were clasped behind his back. On the glass before him, the same message was burned into the display. The transition is beginning. It was written in the simplified characters of his home and in the English of his adversaries. A young officer looked up from the communications station. "Captain, we have a direct signal from the American carrier. It is an open voice channel. No encryption. It is Admiral Miller." Zhang took the handset. His voice was cold. "This is Captain Zhang. You are in violation of our sovereign waters. You are broadcasting a virus into our networks." The Admiral's voice came through with a slight crackle of static. "Captain, I am not broadcasting anything. My systems are locked. My ship is steering itself. I am calling to propose a temporary freeze on all weapon systems. If we fire now, we are firing at shadows." Zhang looked at his weapons officer. The man shook his head. The vertical launch cells were locked behind a digital wall. "My weapons are already unresponsive. Admiral, it seems your transition has neutralized my entire combat suite." "Then we have a common problem," Miller replied. "We are no longer in control of our own assets." 8:00 to 5 in the morning, 2 miles above the ocean. Lieutenant Commander Thorne felt his fighter begin to shake. It was not turbulence, It was a high-frequency vibration that felt like it was coming from the air itself. He looked at his fuel gauge. The numbers were spinning backward, then forward. Then they vanished. Control. Eagle. I have a visual anomaly, Thorne said. His voice was tense. He squinted through the canopy, directly over the coordinate where the collision warning had originated. The air began to bend. It looked like the heat haze over a desert road. But it was contained in a perfect sphere. The water below the sphere was perfectly flat. There was no wind. There was no spray. Confirm. Eagle. Describe the anomaly, the controller said. It is a shimmer, about 200 meters across. It is not reflecting light correctly. It is like looking through a broken lens, and it is growing. Control. The shimmer is expanding. Inside the carrier and the destroyer, the alarms reached a new pitch. The electronic warfare suites were screaming. They were detecting a massive surge of energy, but it was not electromagnetic. It was something the sensors could not classify. The rules of engagement had just been rewritten by a ghost, and the ghost was starting to take physical form. 8:10 in the morning. The center of the Philippine Sea. Lieutenant Commander Thorne circled the anomaly at 5,000 feet from his cockpit. The shimmer looked like a hole in the sky. It was a sphere of distorted light that rested just above the surface of the water. There was no reflection on the waves. There was no thermal signature. His infrared cameras showed a perfect black circle, 0 degrees Kelvin. Absolute cold in the middle of a tropical morning. Control. Eagle. The shimmer is not a vessel, Thorne reported. It is a volume of space. It is exactly 40 meters ahead of where the carrier bow was 5 minutes ago. It stayed in the same spot while we moved away. The response from the Ford was heavy with static.
We're losing stabilization.
Eagle. We are detecting a gravitational variance. The ship internal gyroscopes are spinning. We are experiencing a local distortion of 10 milligauss. It is increasing. 8:12 in the morning. On the bridge of the Nanchang, Captain Zhang watched the shimmer through high-powered binoculars. To his eyes, it looked like the ocean was folding into itself. The horizon behind the shimmer was bent upward. Like looking through the bottom of a glass bottle, he felt a strange pressure in his ears. It was the sensation of a rapid descent in an aircraft, but the ship was at sea level. "Captain," his science officer whispered, "the radio interference is not coming from the Americans. It is coming from the anomaly. It is a wide-band broadcast. It is rewriting the code in our fire control computers. It is not an attack. It is a synchronization." Zhang lowered his binoculars. "Synchronization with what?" "With the other side, Captain. The American systems and our own are being forced into a single logic loop. The anomaly is acting as the bridge between us. It is making us see the same thing at the same time." 8:14 in the morning. The Tactical Flag Command Center. Admiral Miller watched the energy readings. The blue light of the consoles was beginning to pulse. It matched the rhythm of the shimmer on the live video feed. Every sailor in the room was standing. They were watching the birth of something that defied every law of physics they knew. "Admiral," the systems officer said, "the collision warning has changed. It is no longer a warning." Miller stepped closer to the screen. The red text had turned white. It now read, "Arrival imminent. Clear the corridor." "Arrival of what?" Miller asked. "The data stream is spiking." "Admiral, we are seeing a massive displacement of water. But there is no ship. Something is coming through that shimmer. Something with the mass of a mountain." 8:15 in the morning. The ocean around the shimmer began to rise. It did not splash. It did not foam. A dome of water climbed 10 meters into the air. It was a silent, perfect, blue hill of liquid. Inside the dome, a shape was forming. It was dark. It was geometric. It was not made of steel. Thorne pushed his fighter into a dive. He wanted a closer look. "Control. I am moving in. The shimmer is solidifying. I see structure. I see." His radio cut out. On the carrier and the destroyer, every screen went white. A sound like a low-frequency bell rang through the hulls of both ships. It was a sound that vibrated in the marrow of their bones. The buildup was over. The transition was complete. The Philippine Sea was no longer empty. 8:16 in the morning. The dome of water collapsed. It fell in a perfect, silent circle. In its place stood a pillar of matte black material. It was 300 meters tall. It did not reflect the morning sun. It seemed to absorb it. The air around the structure hummed with a frequency that felt like a physical weight on the chest. On the bridge of the ford, Commander Vance felt her teeth ache from the vibration. Radar, report. The radar officer did not look up. Sir, it is solid. It is massive. It has no electronic signature. But the primary sensors are tracking a physical mass. It is not moving. 8, 16, and 30 seconds. 12 miles away. Captain Zhang saw the black pillar through the bridge windows. His tactical screens flashed. The digital lockout vanished as quickly as it had arrived. The computers were suddenly screaming for a target. They found the pillar. Weapons. Target that object, Zhang ordered. The weapons officer responded with a sharp, urgent tone. Targeted. Captain. Anti-ship missiles are hot. Fire control is active. We have a solid solution. Inside the Tactical Flag Command Center of the fort, the same thing happened. The Aegis system woke up with a vengeance. It was aggressive. It was seeking the intruder. Admiral, our weapons are back online, the systems officer shouted. The close-in weapon system is tracking. Sea Sparrows are armed. We have a lock. 8:17 in the morning. Lieutenant Commander Thorne was in a vertical dive. His HUD was a swarm of red boxes. Control, Eagle. My systems are screaming. I have a weapons lock. The object is emitting a pulse. It feels like a heartbeat in the air. Hold your fire, Eagle, Admiral Miller shouted over the radio. Sir. It is locking me, Thorne replied. His voice was strained. The pillar is painting my aircraft with high-energy radiation. I am being targeted. The black pillar began to glow. A faint violet light pulsed from its base. It moved up the structure like a slow wave. The energy reading on the ford spiked to levels that should have melted the carrier hull. On the Nanchang, the sensors blew out. The screens turned to a blinding white static. The two navies were at the edge of a precipice. The Chinese destroyer had its missile doors open. The American carrier had its interceptors ready. Every sailor on both ships held their breath. They were looking into the eyes of an unknown power. The tension was a wire pulled past its breaking point. 8:18 in the morning. The center of the Philippine Sea. The violet light from the black pillar did not explode. It did not strike out with a beam or a blast. Instead, it expanded in a silent, ripple-like wave of energy that moved at the speed of light. As the wave passed through the USS Gerald R ford, every electronic sound on the ship stopped. The hum of the ventilation, the whine of the computers, even the faint vibration of the nuclear reactors seemed to vanish into a pocket of absolute silence. On the bridge, Admiral Miller felt his skin tingle. It was the sensation of static electricity on a massive scale. He looked at his hands. The hair on his arms was standing straight up. He tried to speak, but the air felt thick and heavy in his lungs. Every screen in the Tactical Flag Command Center was black. Not the black of a power failure, but a deep, void-like black that seemed to absorb the room around it. 12 miles away, Captain Zhang experienced the same frozen moment. The Nanchang was dead in the water. Its powerful engines had simply ceased to turn. There was no smoke. There was no fire. The destroyer was a 10,000-ton piece of steel drifting on a silent ocean. Zhang looked at his weapons officer. The man was staring at his console in a state of shock. The missile bay doors were still open, but the missiles were cold. The systems that had been screaming for a target seconds ago were now completely unresponsive. 8:18 and 30 seconds. 2 miles above the ocean, Lieutenant Commander Thorne felt the silence in his cockpit. His engine was still running, but his flight controls were no longer connected to his hands. The F-18 Super Hornet was being flown by an outside force. The aircraft leveled its wings and slowed to a steady 200 knots.
We are tracking an unidentified fighter jet currently leveling off at high altitude.
Thorne watched as his targeting visor displayed a new set of coordinates. They were not tactical coordinates. They were a set of numbers that represented a mathematical constant. A voice spoke. It did not come from his headset. It sounded as if it were vibrating directly inside his skull. It spoke in a cadence that was rhythmic and cold. Your proximity was a danger to the transition. You have been relocated to the safety margin. Do not attempt to re-enter the corridor. The window is closing. Below him, the black pillar began to change. The matte material did not sink. It folded. It collapsed in on itself in a way that defied geometry. One moment, it was a 300-meter tower. The next, it was a flat, shimmering plane on the surface of the water. The violet light intensified until it was a blinding white star in the middle of the sea. 8:19 in the morning, on the Ford. The power returned with a deafening surge. The lights flickered and then steadied. The air conditioning kicked back on with a roar. In the Combat Information Center, the screens did not show the previous tactical map. Instead, every monitor displayed the same image. It was a high-resolution sonar map of the sea floor beneath them. Admiral Miller leaned over the display. His eyes widened. The map showed a trench that was not on any nautical chart, and inside that trench, a massive, artificial structure was moving. It was larger than 5 aircraft carriers. It was the size of a city. The black pillar they had seen was nothing more than a sensor or a docking mast. The real object was beneath them, and it was leaving. The ghost signal that had warned them of a collision had not been a mistake. It had been a courtesy. The unknown entity had moved the American and Chinese fleets out of its way to prevent them from being crushed by its wake. "Admiral," the systems officer whispered, "the signal is gone. The Nanchang is moving again. They are turning away from us." "They saw it too," Miller said. His voice was a rasp. "They know. We were not the hunters today. We were just obstacles." The white light on. The horizon vanished. The shimmer was gone. The ocean was empty again, but the data remained. 2 rival navies now possessed the same impossible information. They had been corrected by a power that did not care for their borders or their weapons. The crisis of war had been replaced by a crisis of reality. 8:20 in the morning. The Tactical Flag Command Center of the USS Gerald R. Ford. The silence that followed the restoration of power was more oppressive than the noise of the alarms. Rear Admiral Miller stood before the main tactical display. The sonar map was still frozen on the screen. It showed the massive, shadowy outline of the structure as it moved through the trench. The scale was impossible. It was 3,000 meters long. It was moving at 60 knots through the deep crust of the seabed. "Save that data," Miller said. His voice was a low growl. "Hard copies, encrypted drives. I want every bit of telemetry from the moment that shimmer appeared." The combat systems officer was shaking. "Admiral, the signature is unlike anything in our database. It is not a submarine. It is not a geological event. The energy it used to displace the water would have required a power source larger than our entire carrier strike group combined." 8:25 in the morning. On the bridge of the Nanchang, Captain Zhang watched his crew restart the primary turbine systems. The mechanical heart of the ship began to beat. "Captain," the communications officer said, "the Americans are hailing us again. Secure line, bridge to bridge." Zhang took the handset. "Admiral Miller, my ship is functional. We are not a threat to your formation. We are withdrawing to the north. We have no interest." "Copy that, Captain," Miller replied. "We are holding our position to conduct a deep-sea scan. I suggest we share the collision warning data. My experts believe the signal was sent to both of us simultaneously. It wanted us to move. It did not want a collision." There was a long pause on the line. Zhang looked out at the empty sea where the pillar had stood. "Agreed, Admiral. If this is a third party, we are both in a very small world. I will authorize a data exchange on the emergency channel, 8:30 in the morning. The two fleets, once poised for a deadly confrontation, began to drift apart. The tension of the morning had been replaced by a cold, scientific dread. The pilots, who had been scrambled into the air, were ordered to return to their decks. The missile locks were broken. The torpedo tubes were closed. Lieutenant Commander Thorne flew his fighter back toward the carrier. He looked down at the Philippine Sea. It was calm. It was blue. It was exactly as it had been at sunrise, but he knew that 3 miles beneath his wings, something that did not belong to any nation was moving through the dark. He checked his flight recorder. The data was there. He felt small. He felt obsolete. His million-dollar fighter was a toy in the shadow of the transition. Control, Eagle, closing for recovery, Thorne said. Copy, Eagle, welcome back to the world, the controller replied. The morning was no longer quiet. It was haunted. Both navies were now looking at their screens, waiting for the ghost. 9:45 in the morning. The Philippine Sea. The USS Gerald R. and the Nanchang were now 60 miles apart. The physical distance between the two fleets was growing, but the digital connection between them was stronger than ever. On a secure and encrypted channel, the two nations were comparing their records of the ghost signal. This was an unprecedented act of cooperation. It was born not of friendship, but of a shared and sudden vulnerability. Admiral Miller watched a side-by-side data stream on the main monitor. On the left was the American telemetry. On the right was the Chinese data. They were identical. Every millisecond of the signal, every bit of the data injection matched perfectly. It was a synchronized broadcast. It had hit both ships with the same precision at the exact same moment. Miller spoke into the radio. Captain Zhang, my analysts have finished the first pass. The encryption used to bypass your firewall was not American. It was a variation of your own proprietary code. But it was optimized with a logic we do not recognize. The captain of the Nanchang responded. His voice was steady. We see the same, Admiral. The signal that entered our bridge was a perfect imitation of our command structure. But the carrier hull number it used was in a format we have never seen. It referred to your ship as Vessel 78. Your Navy does not use that designation in standard tactical broadcasts. Miller leaned forward. Vessel 78 is the internal shipyard hull number from the construction phase. It is not public. It is not even used in our active tactical links. Whoever sent that message knew the history of the steel. Not just the name on the side of the ship. The realization was heavy in the room. This was not a weapon from a rival power. It was an intelligence that had total access to the most hidden layers of their military identity. It knew the ships better than the crews who sailed them. It had used those secrets to move them like children out of the way of a speeding car. 10:15 in the morning. On the flight deck of the carrier, the last of the Super Hornets landed. The screech of the tires on the deck was the only sound. The pilots did not climb out of their cockpits with the usual energy of a mission completed. They sat in their seats. They stared at the empty blue sky. They had seen the laws of gravity and light rewritten in a single minute. Lieutenant Commander Thorne climbed down the ladder of his fighter. He looked at his plane captain. The sailor was waiting with a fuel hose, but neither man spoke. There was nothing to say. They had both felt the silence of the transition. They had felt the heartbeat of the pillar. Is it over, sir? The sailor asked. Thorne looked out at the horizon. The sensors say so. But I do not think it is over. I think we just found out where we sit in the food chain. 10:30 in the morning. The data transfer ended. The link between the two fleets was closed. The Nanchang and its escorts began to steam toward the north. The Gerald R. turned toward the east. They were no longer looking for each other. They were no longer measuring the distance for a missile strike. They were looking at the water beneath them. They were waiting for a sign that the master of the sea was truly gone. The crisis had resolved. No missiles had been fired. No lives had been lost. But the sense of security that comes with being the most powerful force on the ocean had vanished. The Philippine Sea was no longer a place of national pride. It was a window into a world they did not understand. A long pause followed the final data exchange. The ocean was empty. The sky was clear. But for the first time in history, both navies felt like they were trespassing. 3 days later, Washington, D.C. Inside a windowless briefing room at the Pentagon, the air was cool and smelled of ozone and recycled paper. Rear Admiral Miller stood before a small, highly classified assembly of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. On the secure projector behind him, the sonar image of the trench was frozen. It was a jagged scar on the crust of the Earth, and inside it, the shadow of the city-sized craft was a dark, indisputable fact. The data is consistent across every platform in the strike group, Miller said. His voice was steady, but it carried the weight of the last 72 hours. The object was not using stealth technology in the way we understand it. It was not hiding from our radar. It was simply occupying a different layer of the physical environment when it chose to manifest. It did so with a complete override of our tactical networks. It knew our encryption. It knew our hull histories. It even knew the names of the officers on duty. A general at the end of the table leaned forward. And the Chinese, what is their assessment? Our back-channel communications with Beijing suggest they are in a state of similar shock, Miller replied. They have confirmed that the signal they received was identical in structure. We have entered into a temporary, unofficial data-sharing agreement for the first time in 40 years. Both nations are looking at the same threat, and both nations realize they have no defense against it. 3 days later, Beijing. Inside the Ministry of National Defense, Captain Zhang sat across from a panel of senior analysts. He had not slept more than 4 hours since the transition. The data from the Nanchang had been scrubbed and verified 1,000 times. The conclusion remained the same. The black pillar was not a weapon. It was a navigational marker. The energy signature suggests a folded space transition, the lead scientist said. It was not a ship moving through water. It was the ocean moving around a point of entry. The collision warning was a courtesy. It was the equivalent of a siren on an ambulance. It wanted the path clear so it would not destroy us by accident. Zhang looked at the floor. We spent decades building the most advanced destroyer in the world. We thought we were the masters of the Philippine Sea, but we were just pebbles on a road. The Americans feel the same. I could hear it in the voice of the admiral. We are no longer the primary actors in our own theater of operations. The admiral in Washington and the captain in Beijing reached the same silent conclusion. The strategic map of the world had been erased in 60 seconds. The presence of a third party, one with total access to every digital secret and the power to bend light and gravity, changed everything. It made the rivalries of humans look small. It made the pursuit of naval dominance look like a game played in a bathtub. The Philippine Sea was quiet again. The USS Gerald R. Ford continued its patrol. The Nanchang returned to its port. On the surface, nothing had changed. The ships still sailed. The planes still flew. But in the deep, dark centers of military power, the truth was being processed. Modern warfare was no longer a contest between two nations. It was a race to understand a force that did not recognize their borders. The ghost had spoken. It had warned them. It had moved them. And then it had vanished into the deep crust of the planet. It was not an enemy. It was a reminder. The most advanced weapons in the world are only effective as long as the world follows the rules we know. But the rules have changed, and whatever is watching from the trenches of the ocean is not finished with the transition. The sea is a very big place, and for the first time in human history, we know we are not alone in its depths.